Good evening, friends. We are giving it a second go around. We tried to record earlier. Something happened to the recording, so we are trying it once again. And we hope that this second time is going to work for us. We are moving through this magnificent letter of Revelation, and we are now in the second stages of this letter that we're looking at. We're looking tonight at chapters 2 and 3 in this theme that we're calling Striding Among the Golden Lights. What a beautiful image it is that Revelation gives us according to the way that Jesus sees churches, the way that we're viewed by his perspective as golden lights and as he strides among us as his living, abiding presence in our midst. Tonight we're going to look at how Jesus speaks to seven churches. That's not to say that seven represented the only number of churches in the Roman Empire, but it is a complete number, and it represented the seven dominant regions that churches were in, and those churches would then communicate to the other communities in their region and continue the message spiraling outward like circles in a whirlpool. So 7 is a number of completion. And we said last week that the book of Revelation is broken down into 7 dominant sections, all of which have Jesus at each of these sections as he makes 7 appearances, 7 visions of Jesus throughout this letter. But there are 7 sevens throughout the letter of Revelation. The second 7 is 7 churches that we'll see in chapters 2 and 3. We will see 7 seals in chapters 4 through 7. We will see 7 trumpets in chapters 8 through 11. We will see 7 visions of evil in chapters 12 through 14. We will see 7 bowls of justice poured out in 15 through 18. And 7 last things dealing with the conquest of Jesus's dominion and his ruling kingdom in chapters 19 through 22. So you get those 7 segments, 7 sevens throughout Revelation, and signaling the beginning of each of those, you find Jesus. Jesus running throughout this letter. As we said last week, it is revelation, singular. It is about Jesus. It is from Jesus. It is for Jesus. It is given through Jesus. Jesus is the deliverer of the message. Jesus is the goal of the message. Jesus is the source of the message. Jesus is ultimately what Revelation is about. John is writing this letter on the prison island of Patmos, which is where it was given, as we saw last week in our introductory lesson. And this week we turn our attention to chapters 2 and 3. These 7 churches will represent like a personality profile. And we can think as we look at these 7 churches, what profile would our church resonate with most? Because you'll find that these churches each have their own fingerprints. They each have their own identities. They each have their own kind of profiles that make them who they are. In the same way that we have church profiles these days. And you'll find that in these churches, they range from faithful to less faithful along the spectrum of faithfulness. And when you use your church as to kind of gauge where you would be in the spectrum, you want to be honest and you want to measure yourself accordingly by the standards that Jesus gives, to ask ourselves, where would we situate ourselves along this spectrum of faithfulness? You'll hear these days people often say, I like Jesus, but I don't like the church. I consider myself a spiritual person, but I'm not one who really is interested in church. Well, you would need to reevaluate that standpoint once you read chapters 2 and 3. Because you don't find the letter of Revelation written to people who are just private and personal and serving God in the secrecy of their own closets with curtains closed and Venetian blinds shut. Here's a letter to you. No, the letter is only to those who are in the covenant community. Meaning that it really is not even assumed in Scripture that you're going to have maverick, solitary believers. That's not even assumed in Scripture. This mentality that creeps in these days that I can believe in Jesus and I can be private and personal. I don't have to affiliate or associate with all the messiness that goes on in churches. It reminds me of that quote from the 18th century romantic poet from Britain, Byron Shelley, who once famously said, "I would be a Christ follower if it weren't for that ugly bride that he keeps as a sidekick." We are that ugly bride, and all throughout the Gospels you will find that Jesus associated with all kinds of ugliness that people would fault him for later. One might say that Jesus was crucified because of the ugly company that he kept. Whores, tax collectors, and thieves, as the Gospels proclaim it. And I guess you would say that the covenant community is made up of people who were formerly whores, tax collectors, and thieves. And we are that covenant community who knows that we need that covenant community. We need one another. We need one another in a way that will keep us honest, in a way that we can't really keep ourselves honest in isolation and privacy. I easily evaluate myself when I'm the only one looking at myself, and there's nobody else looking over my shoulder, and nobody else I have to ask, do I have bad breath? Because it smells good enough to me. I mean, as long as I'm my own judge, and as long as I'm only accountable to me, looking back at myself in the mirror, I never really have to answer for anything. And so that's why this message is given to a covenant community. A community of people who are pledging with one another and who are affiliating and associating with one another, and they're public and they're visible. Jesus says you can't take a light and put it under a bushel. You've got to be public. You've got to be visible. It's not going to be belief that can be lived out in the secrecy of your own private chambers. So there is none of this business, I'll take Jesus but not the church, because Jesus is the one striding in the midst of 7 golden lights. And think about it. When John is writing this, he has already told us in the first chapter that things are getting ready to heat up. Things are getting ready to escalate. Persecution is getting ready to increase. It would have been much more convenient, much more comfortable for these 7 churches to say, okay, that's it. Let's all decide to live out our faith in secrecy because Domitian has already put John out there on Alcatraz Island. We don't want to join him out there. Let's just serve God in secrecy and in privacy. We'll just be personally in secret, a believer and faithful to Jesus, and nobody else has to know. That's not an option. And Jesus said that as much when he taught his disciples that you can't put a light under a bushel. If he's going to describe churches as 7 golden lights, then that means we've got to blaze like golden torches. And this secrecy and privacy and being in our own isolated chambers, that's not going to be a live option. And you'll find that the churches they're going to situate themselves along a spectrum of more faithful and less faithful, but Jesus identifies them as the ones that he's speaking to. He nowhere makes allowances for people who are just in secrecy somewhere. So even the less faithful churches are given a message that the person who is attempting to do something in secrecy, it is assumed that even the less faithful churches are further along than the person who's decided, well, I'll just serve Jesus in my own way in privacy, in secrecy. Even the less faithful churches are getting the message that the one who is in private, trying to be a maverick, trying to be, his own person, marching to his own drum, that person is not even put into the message receipt. I mean, that person is not even going to have the letter read to them. So we figure here that we're going to not even consider, I'm going to try this all by my lonesome. Don't think that way, because you'll never hear the message if you do. No Lone Rangers. And when you think about Lone Rangers, I mean, think about how the only Lone Ranger that we really have in the Gospels was Judas. He was the one who was always slipping off in secret, always doing things behind the scenes, not accountable to anybody, making sure that nobody was looking over his shoulder. Things do not end well for Lone Rangers. Things don't end well for people who are trying to do things in secret. Things don't end well for people who decide I'm just going to be a maverick on my own terms. I'll take Jesus, but don't give me that messy, ugly bride stuff. Well, ugly or not, Jesus is going to say this message is for all the ugly brides out there, 7 of them, and they are the ones that I'm calling golden lights. Let's take a look at chapters 2 and 3 and see the significant threads that run throughout these 2 chapters and how Jesus speaks to these 7 churches. And right off the start, look at this magnificent image that we receive as Jesus is going to identify us with this just incredible title and incredible identity. The one with 7 stars in his right hand, striding among the golden 7 light circle, speaks. We are that 7 light circle, you see. We're in that golden lights circle that Jesus is striding among. Now let's take a look at these 7 churches, each taking us a passage from each of them to see what Jesus says. And listen for the running threads that run throughout all 7 of them. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who is victorious, I will give the right to eat from the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. The church of Smyrna. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who is victorious will not be hurt at all by the second death. The church of Pergamum. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who is victorious, I will give some of the hidden manna. I will also give that person a white stone with a new name written on it, known only to the one who receives it. Thyatira. To the one who is victorious and does my will to the end, I will give authority over the nations. The one will rule with them with an iron scepter, and will dash them to pieces like pottery, just as I have received authority from my Father. I will also give that one the morning star. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Sardis. The one who is victorious will, like them, be dressed in white. I will never blot out the name of that person from the book of life, but will acknowledge that name before my Father and his angels. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The church of Philadelphia. I am coming soon. Hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. The one who is victorious, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will they leave it. I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God, and I will also write on them my new name. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Laodicea, chapter 3. Those whom I love I rebuke and discipline, so be earnest and repent. Here I door knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person, and they with me. To the one who is victorious, I will give the right to sit with me on my throne, just as I was victorious and sat down with my Father on his throne. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. That represents the 7 personalities, 7 identities that you see along that spectrum. When you get into the later portions of Revelation, you'll see that there is the triumphant Christ, there is the conquest, there is the dominion. But notice it's not a coincidence that before you get to the conquest, the triumph, the dominion, you have to pass through the ugly bride. It is going to be this messiness of the church that people like Byron Shelley think is just, some kind of insignificant thing that we can all do without. Not so for Revelation. Before we get to victory, conquest, triumph, Jesus thinks so highly of his churches that he puts us at the beginning of this letter to say that the churches are his torches. They are his blazing lights. They are going to be his representatives. They're going to be the expressions. And so you never find throughout the New Testament, you never find this notion that people are going to just live out their faith in isolation. In fact, we are admonished to not forsake the assembling with one another. That's what it says in Hebrews. If it were just a trivial thing, if it were something incidental that we could take or leave, then we wouldn't have this commanded. We wouldn't have this as a priority of our faith. Forsake not the assembly with one another. Because all the way back to the time of Moses, we find that God formed a covenant community. Now, I know how I tend to think. I don't know if you're like me, but I tend to think that I can easily learn love and forgiveness and generosity in theory. Oh, ask me all about what it says on paper and I'll tell you. But when I got to deal with the messiness of actually forgiving you for the way that you've upset me, then that's where theory has to turn to practice. And that's where all of my abstract ideas have to suddenly become concrete. So it's easy to think that we know things theoretically. We know things on paper. We know things as an idea. But for Jesus, that's not really what constitutes the Christian faith. We are a practicing community. We are a community that embodies what we believe and profess. It's not a matter of just staying in the realm of theory and thinking lofty thoughts in the privacy of our own chambers. I've got to come out and practice generosity, practice forgiveness, practice the things that are going to require of me an accountability. And so when I am accountable to you, then I am going to learn that maybe keeping covenant is not as easy as theory sometimes makes it out to be. That there are going to be some edges to this that are going to stretch me to new places. We're calling this lesson stepping into a new dimension, living fourth dimensionally in a three-dimensional world. Too much of our living is constricted by the things that we think we already know. And you'll see that one of the recurring threads in all 7 of these messages, if you caught it, was listen. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches, repeated 7 times. And I have found that maybe one of the most challenging disciplines of our Christian life is in learning to listen, learning to hear what Jesus is saying. Because if we think for a moment that when Jesus speaks that everyone in the world will just get silent and respect our hearing so that they don't interrupt us, then think again. Because there are always going to be multiple clamorous voices jockeying for our attention. And some of them strong-arming us a whole lot stronger than the voices that Jesus is speaking. His voice most of the time is a still small voice. And the world tends to be awfully demanding in that we listen to that voice. Old Domitian, he absolutely insisted that we listen to his voice. And so it's not a coincidence that it is so important and so vital and so high of a priority that we learn to listen to what the Spirit is saying. Because you see another repeated thread that runs throughout, to the one who overcomes. So in other words, my listening is going to require some overcoming on my part. I am going to have to overcome some things. I'm going to have to learn to say no to a lot of stuff before I can say yes to the things that Jesus is saying to me. I am going to have to make a relentless, resilient, determined effort to absolutely reject some voices that are clamoring for my attention if I'm going to be disciplined enough to hear what Jesus is saying to me. I'm going to find that this is so important that Jesus repeats it 7 times to each church. You will notice out of those 7 churches that 5 of the 7 are faulted for their irreverence, various degrees of it. Now, you think about that proportion and you think if we were to apply that proportion to today's churches, then we would say 5 out of every 7 need to learn something about showing reverence and honor to God. 5 out of every 7. Because it shows how much of a challenge it is to remain reverent to the things that God asks of us, to the one who overcomes. In fact, if I'm going to listen to God and I'm not having to overcome anything, then I might want to reevaluate. If I think that honoring and listening to God is so effortless and so easy, and I don't find myself stretched, and I find myself having to say no to almost anything. I don't find myself saying no to my friends. I don't find myself saying no to my family. I find myself able to just be agreeable to life. And I just find that I can have everything that I desire, and it all is available to me at once. I might want to reevaluate, because we will find that there are some aspects of those 7 churches that are given this message to, that you find that the things of God do have a recurring element to them. They're undeserved, they are unmerited, and they are unearned. Those 7 churches cannot earn the graces of God, they cannot deserve the graces of God, and they cannot in any way merit them based on their own behavior. But somewhere along the way, we have allowed in a 4th component that is not scriptural and is actually fatal if we give it place. And that is that the things of God are somehow unconditional. That is not true, because you find that throughout those 7 words to the churches, that there is a recurring condition: to the one who overcomes. To the one who overcomes is the one who will receive the rewards. Now, 5 of the 7 are faulted for their irreverence, but you will notice that Jesus usually gives the churches, of the 7, he gives 3 of them a compliment and a correction. He gives 2 of them only a correction, and he gives 2 of them only a compliment. Now, I'd like to go back and look at the 2 that only receive the criticism. They only receive a criticism and not a compliment. In other words, Jesus says, I have this against you, and then he tells them what they're doing wrong. And one of those churches is Sardis. If we might go back to that church and look at what Jesus says to them. He reminds this church, the one who is victorious will, like them, be dressed in white. I will never blot out the name of that person from the book of life, but will acknowledge that name before my Father and his angels. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. But what is similar between Sardis and Laodicea, and we'll come back to Laodicea here momentarily, they are the only 2 churches of the 7 that only get a criticism and not a compliment. And you ask, why would that be? Both Sardis and Laodicea, uniquely in their communities, they were in more prominent economic communities. Both of them were. Of those 7 communities that are listed there, Sardis and Laodicea were in more wealthy communities. And you see by the messages that Jesus gives them that they were each tempted to reflect their society more than Jesus. They were tempted to do that. They did not want to make the hard decisions that would make things more difficult for them. And those decisions would have made things more uncomfortable and more inconvenient for them. Because we saw last week in Revelation chapter 1 that things were getting ready to heat up. Domitian was one of the cruelest emperors that Rome had, and while he was in office, he did pass a number of policies that made life more difficult for Christians. Beginning with their leaders like John, who were sent into exile at Patmos, and sometimes even worse. So Sardis and Laodicea thought, maybe we can have our cake and eat it too. We can serve Jesus, but we can also make some adjustments to the faith that will align ourselves in such a way where we're not giving offense to anybody. We will make ourselves likable. We will seek to be affirmed and acknowledged and accepted by the surrounding culture at large. What you find in the message to Sardis and Laodicea is that Jesus reminds them in firm, definite, unflinching terms that it is to the one who is victorious. If you are going to receive the things of God, they're unmerited, they're unearned, and they're undeserved, but don't think for a minute that they don't require of you decisive, determined, relentless, fierce, uncompromising choices. where through your faith you're going to have to say no to some things if you expect to say yes to the things of Jesus. And you have to be more concerned about pleasing God and honoring God than you would be earning the accolades and acceptance of the world. And it is only for those who are honoring that and giving reverence to that that Jesus in the end will say, that will be the one who is victorious. That will be the one who will sit by me on my right side. That will be the one who will hear my voice, and I will come in and sit with that person and honor them. As you turn to the last church that Jesus speaks to, the Laodiceans, Jesus will also speak to this church with rebuke and discipline. And he reminds them, those whom I love, I rebuke and discipline. I offer you correction. And he says, be earnest with your repentance. You've got to be fierce about this and relentless. You've got to make a decision that this is going to be more important to you than the affirmation and acceptance of the world. And it is here where you see that reference, I stand at the door and knock. And you're thinking, what is all this repeated knocking for? Is it so Jesus can come in and after knocking on the door, knock on our heads with his righteous hammer? He wants to come in so that he may join us at a table, befriend us as friend to friend, and dine with us in this very intimate and very warm portrait that we're given of Jesus' desire for fellowship with us. Once again, just like the church of Sardis, Jesus tells them this is reserved for those who are victorious. Don't think for a moment that the things of God are just unreserved and indiscriminate and just passed out, without any kind of care or concern or consideration. There are expectations attached, and they honor us, and they lift us, and they elevate us, and they're meant to make us live bigger than we otherwise would. And so for two of these churches, 2 of the 7, Jesus is still calling them golden lights. He hasn't stripped them of that identity. He still refers to them as his bride. And in the first chapter, we're reminded that each church has a specific personal angel appointed to them. Have you ever read that in Revelation? It's right there in chapter 1 that every church has an appointed guardian angel who oversees and protects them and provides a kind of shield around them. What an image. That means that Laodiceans and the church of Sardis, even though they're living these compromising behaviors in their faith, there is a shield by their side, ready and able to protect them and to surround them and to empower them. And Jesus is striding in the midst, right there at the very beginning, to the one who is striding among the 7 golden lights. So don't fail to notice that even the 2 that are not really registering very well on the spectrum of faith, they're at the other side of this. Sardis and Laodiceans, they're not living up to the faith standards. They don't even get a compliment. 5 of the 7 get a compliment at least. 3 of them get a compliment and a criticism. 2 of them only get a criticism. Would your churches be in that company? Would your churches be in the company that have a higher interest and priority to conform to the world's preferences? Would your church consider it a priority to make sure that we never displease anybody? That we never let anybody down? That we never say anything that might not align to anybody's preferences? That when we begin our witness, we begin with the notion, will this upset my son? Will this displease my daughter? Will my husband be upset by this? Will my wife be displeased by this? Or do we say, if I say this, if I live this, if I express this, will this be true to God? Will this honor God? Will this reverence God? I don't care what my son thinks. I don't care what my daughter thinks. I don't care what my husband thinks. That is not going to be my highest priority. Jesus was quite clear when he said that we put the hand to his kind of plow, then that means that father, mother, husband, wife, son, daughter, all of that have to somehow register a lesser priority. Part of the issue that I think Sardis and Laodicea found themselves in is what a lot of churches find themselves in today. We want to somehow find a way to appease everybody. We want to earn their liking. We don't want anybody to be displeased. We don't want anybody to be let down. And sometimes, friends, I think that there is a form of love that is designed to lift us rather than to reduce us to the lowest common denominator. And I think that in the terms of Sardis and Laodiceans, they were living by the lowest common denominator, seeking the affirmation, acceptance, and acknowledgement of the world. And Jesus told them, in my kingdom, you'd be better off to be ice cold than to try to be this dual personality, straddling life, trying to keep your feet in each side of each kingdom all at once. He says that's not possible. It's just not possible to live a lukewarm faith. And you would say that the persons in Sardis and Laodiceans, they were not hostile. They were not rejecting Jesus like rabid atheists. But Jesus wants them to know that because of their lukewarm, compromising, accommodating faith, that they were missing on the riches of God no differently than if they were rabid, vicious, frothing at the mouth atheists. Lukewarmness for Jesus excludes, disqualifies, and puts you outside the periphery of the places where God's life is found. It puts us outside the periphery of God's enriching presence and abundance. Now, when you look at the two churches that are given only a compliment and not a criticism, it's interesting to see those two churches. One of them was in the city of Smyrna, if we might go back and look at that one, which came at the beginning in chapter 2. This church only receives a compliment and not a criticism. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who is victorious will not be hurt at all by the second death. Now, consider that for a moment, that this church in Smyrna, you would think that if there was ever an opportunity, ever license for Jesus to say, look, you people in Smyrna, the Smyrnians of the Roman Empire, here, listen up now. You guys have been going full throttle. And you are receiving heat. So here's your answer. Here's your remedy. Here's your solution. Let off the gas. Just coast for a while. Take it easy. Put your gear into neutral and just drift for a while. You've just been going too full throttle for far too long. Isn't it interesting? Jesus says, I commend you for your faithfulness. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep up as relentlessly and as resiliently that you're doing it. And here's what you want to continue to teach. Tell people, don't fear death, but fear the second death. Fear the second death? That apparently is the message that Jesus says. That was consistent with the Gospels. Remember when that group of people came to him and they said, what about those people that tower fell on? You know, those Galileans, that tower back there, the Galileans that Pilate slaughtered back there, the tower that fell on them, you know. What about those people? Were they worse than other people that they had this kind of tragedy befall them? And Jesus says those Pilates that, the Galileans that Pilate slaughtered and the people that the tower fell on, they were no worse than anybody else. But he says, here's the thing. Don't worry about those kind of things. Worry about what happens after death. That's what you need to worry about. Worry about the everlasting death. Jesus put it into perspective. And he had us to say, don't worry about your life. Don't worry about those who can harm the body. Worry about the one who has the authority over your soul. That's what Jesus always said. And Jesus is true to his message to the Smyrnians there in the Roman Empire when they are getting ready to face ruthless persecution. Of all the times Jesus could say, back off, ease up, take your gas off the throttle. He says, keep pushing it, face forward, and realize that you don't need to worry about death. Tell people to worry about the second death and keep your behavior going in the direction that it's going. Now, when you get to the church of Philadelphia, they were the first original city of brotherly love. Philadelphia, which Philo means brotherly love, and Delphia is the Greek word for city. City of brotherly love is literally what it means. The commonalities between Smyrna and Philadelphia are exactly the opposite of Sardis and the Laodiceans. They are not making decisions to make their economic way of life easier. In fact, they are making decisions that are going to make it harder. Domitian was passing policies that made it harder for business merchants to be faithful. If you were faithful, then people wouldn't do business with you. And they would make it hard. They put the squeeze on you. You know, they would let the mercantile administrators that you were part of put a squeeze on you. If you were not cooperating with their standards, they made it harder for a Christian business owner to operate. So the city in Philadelphia, the city in Smyrna, they're suffering because of it. Now you would think that Jesus would speak to Philadelphia and say, okay, relax, compromise, accommodate. No, he says to the one who is victorious, hold on so that no one will take your crown. Hold on. Keep on pushing forward. And I will write their name on the city of God, and I will write them a new name. So Jesus again gives them a similar message. Don't hold on to this world. Don't live for the delights of this life. Don't live for the accolades of this world. But you prioritize the accolades of the next life, and you live for the responsibility of that life. So, two churches receive only a criticism and no compliment. Two churches receive a compliment and no criticism, and they're the exact opposite, aren't they? One is being faithful, and they are enduring consequences, and they are overcoming, and the other two are compromising, accommodating, and they're not overcoming. So it behooves us to ask ourselves, are we like the Smyrna church and the Philadelphia church? Are we a church that we can sense that we are dealing with some kickback from culture? That we are saying no to some things so that we can say yes to Jesus? And that we're going to deal with whatever repercussions come with that, whatever implications that might invite. We are prioritizing that we're going to please God, and that's the community that we're seeking to build. Or are we seeking foremost to build, how can we be in step with culture? How can we cooperate and corroborate with what culture's doing so that we won't be seen as different, so that we won't be seen as bafflingly out of step with the way mainstream culture's going? We're not interested in conforming to the world, not if we're going to be like churches of Smyrna and Philadelphia. You know, it wasn't that long ago in a little city in Louisiana named Pineville that the citizens woke up one morning and they noticed that coming out of their faucets was water that looked like it had particles in it. And it didn't really alarm anybody at first. They just thought it looked like tiny sedimentary particles, and nobody really overreacted. But they noticed that it was continuing, and those sedimentary particles, they thought this is unusual, and it should have cleared up by now. So finally somebody called the administrator of Water Works there in Pineville. And they told them that there's something unusual in our water, and we just want that somebody to look into that to find out what it could be. Well, he told them he'd be right on it to make sure if there was a problem, they'd get it corrected. And so the administrator looked into it. Come to find out that the reason for those sedimentary particles, the Water Works director discovered that they had replaced a eroded water line, and in the process of replacing the old water line with a new water line, one of the more inexperienced engineers unintentionally crisscrossed a water line with a sewage line. He said it was only one line that was mistaken. There were multiple lines that were corrected. It was only one singular line that was crisscrossed. And he said that based on his account and from what he could determine, it was probably only 1% of the water that was affected anyway. Now, we're in a situation right now. I'm pretty sure that based on any estimates you read, people have less than 1% chance, less than 1% of contracting the coronavirus. But it apparently is enough to shut down the entire world right now. That less than 1%, to shut it all down. And for good reason. Because if you were to come to my house, imagine if I told you, come to my table, I have prepared a table lined of cuisine for you, gifts to you, Look at all the bounty that I have spread before you, and let me assure you that of all of the delights that lie in this cornucopia on my table, 90%, 99% of it is pure, and only 1% of it is tainted by sewage. Let's all dine together. Would that be good to you? 99.99%. Let's even go that high. Let's say that it's 99.99%. Is that good enough for you? Of course it wouldn't be good enough for you. It wouldn't be good enough for you because we're not interested in 0.1%, 0.01%, 0.001%. Why would we ever begin our conversation in regard to God to say, I'm at 51% in my life, isn't that good enough? I'm at 70%, isn't that passing? Aren't we on a pass-fail system around here? God's gifts are undeserved, unmerited, and in every way unearned. But let's not convince ourselves that they are unconditional. They are reserved for those who overcome. They are reserved for those who are striving to be faithful. They are reserved for those who are striving to honor God in all of their ways, to put God first, to put God highest, to not accommodate and compromise, and to begin our conversations with, how can I get liked? How can I make this easier? How can I gain acceptance from the world? That's not the place we start when we start to think about what it takes to be a golden light on God's behalf. No, that's not going to begin it at all. When we think about the nations of Europe prior to World War II, it should give us pause, because historians will ask us, do you know what nation boasted the highest percentage of its population of Christians prior to World War II? Prior to any shots being fired, what European nation boasted the highest proportion? And may I say, it was the significantly higher proportion between first and second place was significantly divided. The highest proportion of believers was in the nation of Germany. And you may be surprised and maybe even shocked to hear that. But prior to any shots getting fired of World War II, Christian churches gathered in large number, and they agreed to form what was known as the Barnum Declaration. And in that declaration, they decided that they could go on being who they were as long as no one interfered with what Hitler was doing. As long as they agreed to fly the swastika on their property, they were free to fly the Christian flag too if they wanted to. Just don't hide the swastika. It's got to be flown as well. And whatever you do, you can't say a negative word about what the swastika represents. And so the Barnum Declaration was a very easy decision for many. They thought, we can go on, we can continue, we don't have to worry about any of our assets getting seized, we don't have to worry about anybody getting fined, we don't have to worry about anybody getting imprisoned, we don't have to worry about anybody getting sent off to exile, just sign the paper. And we can go on being who we are. Yeah, it involves compromise, yeah, it involves accommodation, but it's not that significant, and we can go on being who we are. Well, we found out that it is significant, and we found out that history quickly forgets churches that sign things like Barnum Declarations. We remember the few like Dietrich Bonhoeffer who did not sign such papers, who decided they would go to concentration camps, that they would accept whatever consequences came. And people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer who would write something like The Cost of Discipleship from his prison cell to show us that maybe remaining faithful is to those who overcome, to those who learn to listen to what the Spirit is saying. And that might mean saying no before we can say yes to Jesus. It might mean saying no to a whole host of things in our lives. It might be required of us to let down some people in our life that we don't want to let down in our life. But to be true to Jesus, it might require that of us. An uncompromising, unflinching, unwavering, overcoming level of faithfulness. Only 2 of the 7 churches, of the 7, only 2 are honored and commended and complimented by Jesus without fault found with them. And that was because they were staying true, come what may. And they were erring on the side of caution. They didn't think, well, let's just begin by accommodating or compromising. Maybe in this instance it won't hurt. They started their conversations to say, maybe it won't hurt. But you know what? We're going to err on the side of caution and say we are not going to even take the chance of doing anything or permitting anything in our midst that might stray from what God has called us to and what God insists on us representing, if we are the blazing golden lights that God has gifted us to be. We're going to put that highest. We're going to put that first. And if we find out in the afterlife, there were some things in your life that you said no to that you probably could have said yes to, I don't think anybody's going to say, well, that really disappoints me. I think in the end, nobody's going to be disappointed for being overly faithful to God. But there will be a whole lot that will be disappointed because they were faithless before God, you see. In God's community, we are called to be a covenant community. There is no isolated maverick kind of living the Christian life. There is a community cure, and it's within the context of that faithful, resilient, relentlessly believing community that we learn accountability, that we learn faithfulness, that we learn commitment, that we learn discipline. And with you looking over my shoulder and keeping me honest and keeping me from being too easy on myself and making excuses, we can lovingly uphold one another and be brothers and sisters to one another. And the Christian community gave people a family that they never would have had. Maybe that was why Jesus attracted a lot of people who really didn't have family. The whores, tax collectors, and thieves, there really wasn't a whole lot of family claiming those people. And sometimes the greatest impediment to those who are living for God are those who are putting their family and friends higher than pleasing God. And maybe that might be one of the good things that keep us from the better and best things that we find in God's kingdom. It is the case that one of our most prominent Christian authors tells a story that he was visiting a college campus. And the college chaplain told him that they were getting ready to baptize one of their students, a student who was from a communist country, a country that had rejected the ways of God. But he, as a student in America and a student at this college, had become a part of a Christian group. And his fellow classmates had brought him the Christian faith, and now he was a part of their community, and he wanted to make a profession of baptism. Well, the chaplain told this accomplished Christian author, this student recognizes your writings and has high admiration of you, and it would just be a wonderful admiration. It would be a wonderful gift to him if you could be a part of this baptism. Well, the author was just flattered that he was asked, and he said he would love to be a part of the baptism. So the time came, and the student from the communist country came in, and the author was there, and the student was just so overjoyed to meet this author that he had admired for so long. And the author said, you know what? He said, this is just such a special occasion. Let's take a picture of him getting baptized so we can send it back to his friends and family in his home country, and they can enjoy this moment too. Well, what followed was awkward silence, especially from the chaplain who had invited this author to take part in this. Nobody said anything. He just kind of let it go, and they did the baptism. And then after it was over, the chaplain took that accomplished author aside and said, I wish you hadn't said what you did about taking a picture and sending it home to his family and friends. He said, because when that young man told his family what he was going to do today, they told him that from that moment on, if he went through with it, he would be dead to them. And they would even go so far to have a funeral service where he would be pronounced dead to rights to them. And if he did show up back at their doorstep, legally he would already be pronounced stripped of all legal connections to them. From that moment on, he was legally dead to them in every legal sense of the word. And he said, even with that extreme pronouncement leveled against him, he followed through with what we did here today. That author was so inspired by that it ended up inspiring one of his next books. And he took this theme of how we are called to a resilient faith. We're called to a relentless faith. It is an overcoming faith. And if we're going to be a church like Smyrna or Philadelphia, we had best devote ourselves to talking about fierce, relentless, uncompromised, unwavering, unaccommodating faith, because anything less is not honoring and not reverent to God. Because in the end, Jesus is the one who knocks, and he says for the one who answers. He's not out to browbeat us. He's not out to assert himself upon us as some kind of authoritarian and domineer over us. He desires to come into our life, join us at a table, and dine with us. Dear Jesus, we thank you for striding among 7 blazing golden lights. Lord, as we think about where we might be on that light spectrum, I pray that you'll help us to look at ourselves in the profile mirrors that you've given us and ask honestly and forthrightly, are we faithful or are we faithless? Are we embracing what it means to overcome, or are we lapsing into a life that we think is lenient and unconditional? Remind us, Lord, that though your gifts of grace are unearned, unmerited, and undeserved, we have the high and privileged calling to be conditioned on the calling of being a faithful, overcoming people. May we be the blazing lights in our church, wherever we are, that will blaze for your glory. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.